So here we are, up in the hills, looking for the biblical Israelites. And what have the archaeologists given us? Little groups of refugees living in small, open settlements. Modern archaeology has begun to reconstruct the lives of these ancient people. And if you do that, you start to come up with an amazing coincidence between scientific theory and the words of the Bible. Look, supposing these people had to fight off a Philistine invasion, or supposing they wanted to go down to the plain and fight for better land, they'd have obviously needed to form themselves into a coalition. So who runs the coalition? Well, they were really too poor to pay taxes to any central authority, I think. The Bible tells us that the people who lived up here weren't too keen on kings. And there's another thing too. In the ancient world, abstract ideas are very, very few and far between. The word coalition, for example, is one that an ancient person could not have got his mind around. He could have got his mind around the idea king, or he could have got his mind around the idea of God. So let's have a god of coalition. Let's pretend there was a big god up here that was the god of coalition, and the priests of that god preached that everybody had to join in this coalition, and the country would therefore be strong, it would have a strong army, there would be prosperity, but if anybody dropped out of the coalition, then there would be disaster, defeat, and all the rest of it. So there would be travelling priests, and they would go around, and the travelling priests would hold the identity of the god, and the religion would all be based upon the idea of oneness, of a joint identity shared, and of identity which was sort of bounced off against the neighbours, that it was different, peculiar only to them, and somehow very strong. Well, of course, that is exactly the situation in the earliest parts of the Old Testament in the history of Israel. The travelling priests are the biblical prophets, and the God of the coalition is Jehovah, whose Ark of the Covenant, the rules of the coalition, the 12 tribes carried into battle. You know, here you can almost dig up God himself. Slowly, the Israelites start to emerge. This is the fortress of Arad on the desert edge of southern Israel. Archaeologists tell us that it was continuously inhabited from about 1000 BC. That's about the time of King David in biblical history. There's a temple here too, from about the same time. Texts like this one, written in ancient Hebrew, tell us of an Israelite garrison here a few centuries later. Thousands of years after that huge Canaanite temple at Megiddo, the Israelites of Arad have made their little temple to precisely the same design. Remember that long, dark room lit by narrow shafts of light and the 2 columns, where the musicians used to sing and dance? Here's a little version of it here, built by the Israelites. Here, just like at Megiddo, in the middle of the longest side of the temple, the actual altar of the sanctuary. Remember, at Megiddo, the incense tables are gone, but here in the Israelite temple, 2 of them were found. And on the top of them, they still had the burnt resin in the middle from the very last time that the great wands of smoke were sent up to God. Behind that, of course, the Holy of Holies, the high shrine. You remember, in the Bible, the prophets are always getting angry with these high stones that are set up and throwing them over for the glory of God. Well, they wouldn't have thrown these ones over, because that over there was where Jehovah himself lived. Even when you come out of the sanctuary, when you come in to the courtyard of the temple, the resemblance to the biblical temple of Jehovah, Solomon's temple, is very strong. This is the same sort of courtyard as the 5 books of Moses describe Moses building in the deserts of Sinai itself. This is called the outer court. And over here stood a great water basin, the lava as big as the sea, they say in the Bible, where the priests washed their hands before they went into the Holy of Holies. And over here, perhaps the most remarkable part of all in the temple, this is a sacrificial altar for the Holocaust offerings. Remember, the one at Megiddo was big and round. Now this is built strictly according to the laws of Moses. That means it has to be 5 cubits long exactly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 cubits exactly. So here you see, you've got an Israelite temple built according to the oldest rules of the land that go back thousands and thousands of years. But now, an Israelite temple dedicated to Jehovah himself. And he was quite a different kind of God. You see, other ancient gods were often gods of parts of things. You had gods of medicine and gods of mathematics, gods of life, gods of death. You could say that the science of understanding the world had consisted of dividing it up into bits and giving each bit a different name and a different god. Now, Jehovah was a God of gods, a King of kings, the Bible tells us. He was the God of everything. He was the God of the universal creation. So he was the God of the beginning, the end, of life and death, of medicine, physics, geophysics, every area of experience that you could think of. What we call religion, then, that bit in the church, that bit in the Holy of Holies, is what the ancient people would have just simply thought of as the ineffable mystery at the center of things. Herod's temple is contrary to Jehovah's law, which says that Israel must have but one temple, and that in Jerusalem. The Bible says that David took Jerusalem for Israel and named it the City of David. It also tells us that David's son Solomon built a temple there, a home for Jehovah to hold the Ark of the Covenant. Yet outside the pages of the Bible, there is no evidence at all that King David or King Solomon ever lived. No record from the early days of Israel has ever been found that mentions either of their names. There is the Bible and there are myths, and there's nothing else. Yet today, archaeologists are excavating the site of the most ancient city of Jerusalem, which they are calling the City of David. Sad to say, it's not only David and Solomon that don't exist, at least they don't exist in scientific history. It's also really all of ancient Israel up until that time. Look, I'm standing in David's own city, the ancient city of Jerusalem. I can't say to you that any of these walls were made by an Israelite. They could have been made by a Bronze Age person. The culture's continuous. Even the pottery these people from the early Iron Age, who we call the Israelites, made, even their pottery is a continuation of previous traditions. There's very, very little here. And yet people so desperately want David and Solomon and glorious Israel. All this memorialization of what is really an Iron Age village is proof of that. Christians and Jews alike desperately want this place to live. All the evidence I've been giving you is really circumstantial. It's saying, look here, this is what the Bible shows you. This is how it could have been. When I first came to Jerusalem, I went to see one of the leading archaeologists here, and he asked me why I'd come. I said I'd come to find the Israelites, and we both burst out laughing because we both knew that, in fact, it was a very, very difficult thing to do. But in the end, I found them. At least I think I did. I didn't find them here in the walls, and I didn't find them in the pottery. I found them in something so obvious that I'd overlooked it. I found it in the elements that went to make up its greatest memorial, in the written word, in the ancient written word of Israel. Until a few years ago, the written Hebrew word from the time of ancient Israel, the time of Chronicles and Kings, was very thin on the ground. There were just a few ancient seals inscribed with the name of the scribe who used it. Just a few spare sentences. There was very little. Then in 1980 in Jerusalem, there was a minor miracle. Somebody actually discovered a Bible text, dug it up. And it was such a text. It was actually written, just as the prophet Jeremiah said, on sheets of silver inscribed with a pen of iron, a tiny little plaque. And here it is. It's actually a fragment of the oldest Bible text in the world. When it was found, it wasn't laid out like this. Those little cracks that run across it are the results of a very careful unrolling by the conservators. Originally, you see, it had been written on and rolled up very tightly, and a string passed through it. And it was probably worn on a child's neck. When they started to try and decipher this text, because I don't know if you can see, but it's very difficult to read indeed. The very first word they were able to read was Jehovah. They read it actually 3 times on this plaque before they could read anything else. That was exciting in itself because it was the oldest occurrence of the name of Jehovah in Jerusalem. That is 6th or 7th century BC. Jehovah had come back to his own city. It's actually a part of the book of Numbers. It's the priestly benediction, the words that Jehovah gave Moses to give to Aaron the priest and his sons, the blessing for the children of Israel. May the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May he make his countenance shine upon thee. You know it. It's the prayer that's recited every day in churches all over the world. It's a prayer, incidentally, that my headmaster used to use at the end of every term to dismiss his boys from his school in deepest Surrey. When I told that story to the Israeli who excavated it, he laughed and said to me, yes, when he was a little boy, his father had come back from the synagogue, put his hand on his head and recited this same benediction. The Bible tells us that the children of Israel were in deep trouble when that silver plaque was made. The nation was stumbling ever deeper into sin, it says. Jehovah's inexorable judgment was falling on those who broke his law. After Solomon's death, the Bible tells us, David's great kingdom had split into 2 halves. There was a southern kingdom called Judah, with its capital at Jerusalem, and a northern kingdom called Israel, with its capital at the hilltop palace of Samaria. Bible history and Israelite archaeology finally joined together here at Samaria. Here, archaeologists found an Iron Age palace. Here, the Bible tells us King Omri built a palace. And that palace is mentioned in records from outside ancient Israel, contemporary records, where it's called Beit Omri, the House of Omri. So this, you can say, is a genuine Iron Age excavated palace from the reign of King Omri. I suppose it's Omri's son who's the more famous, though, King Ahab, who refused to walk in the ways of the Lord, as the Bible tells us. One thing the Bible doesn't